What's your paranormal haunted apartment experience? Various paranormal events that happened to me and my brother in an apartment in which we used to live. The small apartment has a corridor that connects the bedrooms and the bathroom with the living dining room. When my mother was not in the house, we used to hear joint cracks coming from the corridor without any apparent explanation. We both used to hear it, and we looked at each other with WTF faces but never saw anything. This happened so frequently, to the point that we used to ignore it. One night when I was alone at home, I was 14 or 15 years old, I was in the living room watching the movie Hard to Kill 4, which had just finished. I remember that I liked the song of the credits, so I turned up the volume and settled down in the armchair. Just after that, I saw how a figure all in white, the height of a child of 8 to 10 years, crosses the wall, passes behind the television and enters the corridor, floating. The figure never looked at me, did not even notice that I was there, but the fear was such that I was paralyzed for a few seconds. When I plucked up the courage to check the bedrooms, I didn't find anything. Every time I remember the story, I get those chills. I've posted bits and pieces of these experiences before, but for the first time, I'm going to share the whole story. This will be a long story, so please hang in there with me. First, a little bit of background. My wife and I got engaged in November of 2014. Shortly beforehand, I had started a new job and we got our first apartment together in December of 2014. My job at the time had me traveling to multiple locations, and our apartment was mostly centrally located to where I would be traveling and had close access to the interstate. The apartment complex itself was built in the early 80s, so a little dated, but not terribly so. The complex itself was made up of 7 buildings, each with 2 to 3 floors with 4 apartments per floor. The apartment complex was also built on a hillside. Our first night we moved in, we just had an air mattress and our pillows and our dog Susie. The first night, we both felt something was off, but we just attributed it to sleeping in a new place for the first time. Over the next few weeks, we moved all of our stuff in the apartment. Our first clue something was not right was lights that had been shut off were turned back on, or vice versa. We initially attributed it to us just being confused and forgetting what was on/off, but over time, we realized that we were right about the lights that had been turned off or on when we left. When we would leave, we would put our dog in her kennel and leave the light on for her. Several times we came back and that light was off and another different light was on. Now on to the personal experiences. When we first started to realize something was not right, my wife's brother came over for a visit one day. My wife was telling her brother about all the weird things, and he just laughed it off and said we were overreacting. Almost immediately after he said this, a cookie tray that was in the entryway closet was flung into the apartment door. It couldn't have fallen as it was tightly wedged between 2 pieces of luggage we had stored in the closet. My wife had the door open to the closet as she needed something out of it for a meal she was cooking and hadn't closed it yet. We were still in the process of getting things unpacked at this point in case she needed something else. We had several other incidents with our closets. They would randomly open when the doors were shut. We would hear them unlatch and open. The weirdest occurrence happened. My wife and I were in separate bathrooms when our closet door unlatched and slowly creaked open. We had a door in our second bedroom that was for the HVAC system in the apartment. It didn't have a doorknob, but a deadbolt that only maintenance for the complex had the key to. One day, my wife was sitting in there playing a game on the computer when it unlocked and opened while she was playing. We also had a mirror on the door to the room that we had put to hang on the outside of the door, so my wife could check her outfits before she left. One day we were playfully chasing each other, and when she shut the door to that room, not hard either, the mirror just shattered into dozens of pieces. The pieces looked like claws. Then there were the entities. The first one my wife saw was one morning when she was taking the dog out to pee. She saw this humanoid figure that had what appeared to have a head dress on and didn't have any discerning genital features. Basically, it was sexless. She saw it behind one tree, and then while she was looking at the tree, it went behind it, leaned out behind another tree that was further away, and looked at her. She was pretty sure it was the same entity. We did some research after this and discovered that when a Native American burial mound in a nearby city had been accidentally excavated, they uncovered 3 bodies. They were reinterred in a cemetery on the same hill the apartment complex was on. Then there were the black figures, and these weren't shadow figures either. One night after I had started a new job and was working midnights, my wife had just finished cleaning the kitchen before she went to bed. Our first dog had passed at this point due to cancer, and we had a new dog we rescued from the local shelter. My wife was sitting in bed when she heard what sounded like something destroying our kitchen. Pot and pans flying and dishes breaking. She suddenly heard something tell her to lock the bedroom door. So she locked it and got back in bed. She saw the shadows of feet on the other side of the door and felt something massively dark and evil in the apartment. She stayed in bed all night, and when she got up in the morning, the kitchen had never been touched. Another time, we were sleeping in bed and she woke up and saw something kneeling beside her side of the bed. It was wearing black but had a pale face, almost skull-like. It had feathers or spikes sticking out of its back, and it smiled creepily at her and went under the bed. I had an experience with a potentially different entity. I woke up to Susie trying to get in bed, which was weird for her. So I picked her up, and as I did do, I felt this massive dark energy fill the apartment. I rolled over and saw a large dark mass descend through our ceiling. It was very large, at least 6 feet tall and at least 3 feet wide. It had a cape or wings that extended another 4 to 5 feet on either side of the body. I pulled the covers over my wife, the dog and I, and tried to sleep. The dark presence eventually left, and I was able to go back to sleep. Another night, I had to go to the bathroom, and for some reason, I went to the bathroom in the hallway instead of the bedroom. I turned on the light to the hallway, and as I stepped into the bathroom, the light started to dim out. I thought it was going to blow out, so I initially ignored it until the bathroom lights started to do the same. I suddenly didn't have to pee anymore. I tried to turn the light off, but it kept doing the same thing. I ran back to bed and got Susie in bed and pulled the covers over our heads again and said, "They are coming." My wife heard this, but in her mostly asleep state, didn't think anything of it until I told her what happened the next morning. The lights were also working fine the next morning. We even had paranormal investigators over one night, and while they couldn't determine what was going on, they did figure out something wasn't right. We eventually had to move out of that apartment. We moved into an apartment in a different city nearby that was owned by the same people who owned the first location. New apartment still had some weird things happen, but nothing nearly as bad as the first. Mostly stuff would go missing then reappear days or weeks later in completely different locations. There were still some entities, but they were mainly outside. They had an ill-defined shape, but would be about the same size as a cat, raccoon, or owl. They would move much faster than their animal counterparts really would though. We both saw something that looked like a child that would run across the fences in between the houses next to the apartment complex. Then there was this childlike entity in the house that was acting like it was playing hide and seek. We would only see it out of the corner of our eyes, and it would disappear when we turned to look at it. We eventually bought a house and moved out of that apartment as well. We still have the issue of stuff disappearing and then reappearing, but that's manageable compared to the other things and entities. My wife and I half-jokingly say one or both of us is haunted, as things seem to follow us. This isn't a work of fiction intended to scare you. It is my account of a ghost that lived in my apartment. I have only told a few people this, and it is from 20 years ago, when I was in college. I lived in student housing with 4 roommates in our pod. It was 5 bedrooms and shared kitchen and bathroom for those 5 bedrooms. The bedrooms were all in a row on one side of a long hallway. My room was on the end opposite the front door, and the kitchen was at the far end of the hall, and the bathrooms were opposite the bedrooms. On multiple occasions when leaving my room late at night, before I could turn my head out of the corner of my eye, there was a nurse standing at the far end of the hall, facing me. Now, there is a nursing program at this college, so a nurse in student housing was a normal occurrence. This nurse, however, was dressed in a manner more appropriate to the 1940s or 50s. Definitely not 2000s scrubs that the current students wore. Now, more than a sight out of the corner of my eye, I would also feel a presence strong enough that I knew someone was there. The best similar feeling I can think of is when there is someone sitting directly behind you in a theater or on public transit. You can't see them, but you can feel their presence and you know they are there. The second I turned my head, the feeling disappeared, and there was no nurse. There was nobody at all, just 4 locked bedrooms and empty kitchen and bathrooms. Yes, I checked every room. Since it wasn't particularly exciting or scary, I dismissed it. I assumed it was because I was tired, and it was late at night. I repeatedly saw the nurse on at least a monthly basis. 1 month, I saw her every week. Nothing I could do to see her better. If I resisted turning my head, the feeling would remain until I looked her way. That's all that ever happened. I never told anyone about the nurse because at this point, it was a pretty boring story. Plus I didn't exactly believe in ghosts, so what was I actually going to tell them? That my mind played a trick on me when I was tired? That's not exactly news. During one of our parties, a classmate of mine asked who the nurse was. My roommates dismissed it because we had all been drinking. I asked him what he saw, and he said she was dressed old-timey and she disappeared fast. I told him there was no nurse here, and he said he knew someone was there, but since there was nowhere for the nurse to hide, he let it go. 2 years later, a friend from my hometown came to visit. Halfway through her visit, she asked why I didn't tell her about the nurse who lived here. I said, because there is no nurse who lived here. She got a confused look on her face and said, then who was wearing the costume? I said I don't know. To be very clear, I never told either friend. I sometimes saw a nurse ghost in my apartment and they don't know each other, so they couldn't have shared their story with each other. So I've lived in Chicago for 6 years now, and my first apartment here was definitely haunted. I've been a firm believer in the paranormal for years, ever since I was a kid, and found books in my local library about ghosts in the non-fiction section. Which of course, I believed it to be common real knowledge back then. I always wondered what it would be like to live in an actual haunted house. Well, I know now. When my roommate and I first moved into this apartment, we were blown away by how cheap the rent was and how large and accommodating the unit was. The owner of the apartment was a little old lady, who we'll call Janet, who couldn't realistically live there anymore because it was a 3-story walk-up unit and her old age was starting to get to her. She had saved up enough to get a retirement condo by the lake but didn't want to give up her old apartment entirely, so she decided to rent it out. Nothing crazy happened at first. It was slowly over time that my roommate and I started to notice more and more bizarre things. Like most experiences people have in similar situations, it started out as unexplainable bumps and thuds. This was an older building that had radiator heating, so most of the noises you could attribute to that. But sometimes things would happen. You would hear what sounded like footsteps walking down the hallway only for no one to appear when they should have. The sound of someone scratching something seemed to occur around you at random times. There was one time I was in my room, probably browsing Reddit, and I heard a scratching sound coming from directly underneath a discarded plastic bag near my wastebasket. We've had mice get into the apartment before so I figured it was a mouse or something. When I threw a pen next to the bag to spook whatever it was from underneath, the scratching continued to happen uninterrupted. When I finally stooped up and picked the bag up, there was absolutely nothing underneath. The scratching bag never made a noise again. Sometimes when you were lying down trying to sleep, there was a sudden feeling that someone had just entered the room, even with the door closed. Hard to explain, but it was just a different type of energy. I would also feel that same energy dissipate, as if whatever it was that came in, left. My roommate once claimed to actually see a pair of floating eyes as he walked down the hallway late one night. Also, while he was sick once, he swore he saw a woman standing in the kitchen from down the hallway. When he looked again, she was gone. 2 of the most insane occurrences there had witnesses, otherwise I feel like I would be doubting my own sanity. One was when a friend of mine who was visiting and I were sitting on my couch in the living room. I had just finished a cup of yogurt and put it down with the spoon still resting in it. It sat undisturbed for a couple minutes, and then we both saw it completely do a 360 spin on its axis. It's as if it tilted itself back and then spun and then sat right back down. My friend and I sat speechless for a second before he said, Did you just see that?" The other instance was when this same friend was staying over on an inflatable mattress in our dining room. For context, our apartment was basically like the shape of a dumbbell. You entered into the living room and then to your right was the hallway. There was my roommate's room on your first left, the bathroom door, which also had a connecting door to my roommate's room, on your next left, and then finally my room on your final left. The hallway opened up into a small dining room which fed directly into the kitchen. This night in particular, we had all been drinking and smoking and whatnot. We went to bed and a massive thunderstorm passed through. The sound of thunder woke me up around 3:30 a.m. That and the sound of my roommate puking in the bathroom. He had had some bad egg rolls apparently. As I'm laying there listening to the sound of him vomiting and the thunderstorm, I hear my friend who is in the dining get up, walk down the hallway and stop directly in front of the bathroom door. I thought to myself, that's weird. He's getting up to check on, we'll call him, John. He knew John in college. He should know he can take care of himself. But there was no knock on the bathroom door. No anything. I didn't think much of it and fell back asleep. When the morning came, I sat in the living room with my roommate and mentioned how our guest had gotten up to check in on him. I heard that too. My roommate said, I wondered why he was just standing outside the bathroom door. Our friend eventually woke up and joined us, but when we asked him why did he do that, he just stared at us and said, "I heard that too, but I thought it was you, getting up to check on John." From his perspective, I can see how he thought it was someone else because the steps were walking away from where he was in the dining room. After I thought about it some more, I realized I never heard any more footsteps after those initial ones, and if it had been my friend, I would have heard him go back to his air mattress. That's the one that has never left my mind. All three of us heard the same thing. We like to think it was just checking on my sick roommate. All in all, to answer my own question of what would it be like to live in a haunted house, the answer is, you just go to bed and pretend it isn't happening. I think this would be a good place to share. I moved into an apartment when I was 18 with a friend, and from the first night we stayed there, it was pretty clear something was up. There was strange knocking on the walls, not something that came from the neighbors, but it sounded like it was in the room with us, and scratching too. If you would ask something, the knocks would respond. Pretty weird. Few days after we moved in, a man came up and said he used to live there but had to move because he felt a negative energy. Something would choke him in his sleep, and everyone hated to come and visit because of the bad vibes. For the year or so we lived there, things were just strange. Our unit, there was a total of 4, was the only one with bars on the windows, and we had a black mold problem that absolutely would not go away. It was impossible to keep the place warm in the winter. Things would move in the apartment. It would sound like someone kicked one of the boxes in my room, making everything inside rattle, or I would hear papers falling to the floor in the kitchen, even when nothing had fallen. When we were alone, it was worse. Once, I felt something touch me on the head, and both my roommate and I reported seeing a shadowy figure pass by our doors in broad daylight. But when friends were over, nothing happened. One night, we set up a cell phone in the corner of the room to record for a little bit while we talked and goofed around, just to see what would happen. When we played the video back, we could hear a male voice muttering over the entire thing, but didn't understand what it was saying. My older brother and his girlfriend, now wife, moved into a duplex apartment in Brooklyn a year back. My parents and I were invited over to check out his apartment after they finished moving everything in. Upon walking into the apartment, my parents and I almost immediately started feeling uncomfortable. The apartment's whole atmosphere felt oppressive, but regardless, we shook it off and put on a face for him and his girlfriend because they were super proud of their home. Fast forward about half a year, my brother asks me to be his photographer at the legal wedding ceremony for the license. I agree and the day goes on. We get back to the apartment late after some food and drink. They ask me to stay over and I agree. So I'm sleeping in the basement next to this walk-in closet on a really comfortable couch. I fell asleep and all of a sudden in my dream, I get transported to like a scene straight out of that old show on History Channel, A Haunting. I'm standing up next to where the couch was, literally watching a fully grown man beat the heck out of this little girl. I'm talking like beating with intent to kill. All of this is happening next to the walk-in closet that's right behind where I'm sleeping. At this point, I'm freaking out internally, but I can't speak out. I desperately wanted to yell at the guy, but I couldn't, so I tried really hard again, and suddenly, I'm back on the couch staring straight at the roof, saying stop really quietly. This is the part that freaks me out the most. When I said stop, a second after, the audible sound of someone punching something dense over and over reacts by stopping. I got so freaked out, I dug my face into the couch and covered up with the blanket like a caterpillar. Fast forward October of this year, I kind of forgot the whole event that happened, and my brother asks me to look after his dog for a few hours while he's on a date with his wife, so I'm laying on the couch with his dog watching some nature documentary when a transparent shadow figure of something walks past the bathroom and disappears going down the stairs. For some background, the stairs that lead down to the basement is basically right next to the living room TV and the bathroom. At that moment, I'm speechless and immediately remembered the basement event of months prior. It was freaky, but I got over it with some more TV.